If you have said to yourself, I should write that, or if someone has said to you, you should write that, then I'm talking to you because you need to write. And that's why you're tuned in to yWrite. Hi, welcome to yWrite. I'm your host, Angela Grout, and thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of yWrite, where we talk to writers about why they're writing and what they're writing to inspire you to not only read what they're writing, but to get you writing too. Today I have a guest in that hasn't written a book, but he's written over 1,000 articles. He is a correspondent for the Reminder publications, and he has written, like I said, thousands of articles from local community news to documenting events, spotlighting individuals, and reporting on events in the community. He writes for the Reminder, the Penny Saver, the Westfield News. I'm sure at one point, if you're in this local area, you have read his work. His work is also on Mass Live. His name is Mike Lydick, and Mike Lydick, I had the honor of being interviewed by him and having him write an article on me a few times, especially when I was releasing my novel, April Rain. He has extensive experience in interviewing people. So today I have the pleasure of interviewing him. And we're going to talk to him about, writing specifically for newspapers and making those deadlines and those word counts and, find out a little bit about what being a freelance reporter is, because that's what he's been doing for many, many, many years, and he has a lot of experience to share with us. So I want to welcome to the show Mike Lydick.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Oh,
this is wonderful, and like I said, the table's a little turned.
Yeah, it's kind of strange to be the person that's being interviewed rather than the person that's doing the interviewing. It's kind of a strange position to be in after all the times that I interview people.
Let me interview you about how you interview people. I know, for myself, bringing you and other guests on the show, I email and let everybody know, what's going to happen during the show. But, kind of giving them some questions to think about that I may ask on the show. And I know when you were interviewing me for the Reminder, for my book, April Rain, you had sent me a few questions, and it was nice to be able to kind of self-reflect on thinking about what I will say.
Well, if I have the opportunity, sometimes I like to send out the questions in advance to somebody by email, because it does give them a chance to think about it and to prepare their answers rather than kind of do it off the cuff. Now, sometimes I don't have that luxury, and I will actually go and interview somebody in person because either they don't want to be interviewed, they don't want to do an email, or it's just not feasible for some reason. So I do it both ways, whichever is comfortable for the person that's being interviewed.
Well, for writers like ourselves, we like to write. So
Absolutely.
It's important for us to write our thoughts down to see them. So that was really good for me when I was being interviewed. I want to ask you, so first, when did you start writing, and how did you get into the writing for newspapers?
Well, actually, I started writing, or I got the writing bug when I was in my junior and senior years at Southwick High School. I took a creative writing course, and that really showed me that I have an interest, and I was encouraged by the English teacher who said, you have a talent for writing. And I didn't go in actually want to be a reporter. I actually went into corporate communications. I became the associate editor for the employee newspaper for Pratt & Whitney Aircraft, and from there, I worked for the Connecticut Education Association in Hartford, which is the state's largest teacher union. And for 35 years, I was the managing editor of their membership publication, which went out to 30,000 teachers. Wow. And I wrote feature articles. I wrote a lot of different articles there. I did the photography. So I did a variety of things, and I did it for 35 years. And when I retired, I decided I still wanted to write. So I started freelancing for the Agawam Advertiser. And I did that up until the pandemic, and then when the pandemic hit, they laid off all of the freelancers. And then about 2021, I got a call from my former editor, and he asked me if I'd like to come freelance for him for the Reminder, which I did for a couple of months, and then they asked me to come on as a part-time staff writer, which I did until November, and now I'm back doing freelance.
Yeah, I mean, and you have a lot of articles that are go into diverse topics, you know.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you interview, you know, people and the community and all sorts of topics. Who do you get to pick your topics as a freelancer?
I do. Not all of them, but I do get to pick a number of them, and I will pitch them to my editor, and they have to have some news value, and they have to be interesting, and they actually have to relate to the community, one of the communities that the paper serves. And one of the reasons that I like to pitch my own articles is that it's something already that interests me. So it's easier for me to write about it or to have the contact and everything. But there are a lot of times that I'm assigned a story to write, which is fine. I will do that. That's part of the job. I also have a beat that I cover, which includes the Agawam schools and the school committee. So it's kind of both. I do pitch stories, and then I also take assignments.
So on the assignment side, so you're given an assignment, and then you're given a deadline for it.
Yep.
And I know, you know, from my own experience, you're given a specific word count because they know the size of the columns, they know where things are going a lot of times. Or do you, how do you make that deadline? How do you get it all starting?
Well, with a weekly paper, I try to start as early as possible because I want to get it done because there's always something else coming along. And I try to work as far in advance as I can because then it hopefully prevents me from having to rush at the last minute. In regards to the word count, I generally do between 800 and 1,000 words for a story because I don't want to go beyond that. Beyond that are two problems. First of all, there's not that much space in a weekly paper because of the size, and second of all, I think after about 1,000 words, people begin to lose.
Yeah, I agree. With
their
newspapers
attention.
and magazines, things like that, like they're looking for the article that they can read start to finish.
Right. It's not like years ago, or if you like to read the New York Times or the
Yes.
Washington Post, where it'd go on for several pages.
Yeah.
So I need to write to that, and I try to keep it to that word length. Sometimes it's hard to get it within that, and I've had to cut stories that I've written because I just had so much information, and it was such a good story, but I knew I couldn't submit like 1,500 words to the paper.
Well, especially if it's a topic that you're passionate about. You want to tell as much as you can, but you're right. You're like, okay, I have to reel this in somewhere. And, like as a novelist, it's like cutting your darlings out of the story.
Oh, actually, I think there's a term for it. It's called demo love. You fall in love with your work, and it's very hard to cut it because it's very personal.
Yes.
For a writer.
Yes.
You spend a lot of time putting effort into that and tweaking every word to a degree. And to have to cut it, it's like cutting a body part.
Yeah, definitely. So when you write, if you're writing 1,000 words for an article, that's an assignment. And I hope I can ask this because I think people who are looking to, maybe write for, papers, things. Do you get paid per word count? Do you get paid for the article? How does one make a living as a freelance writer?
Well, for the Reminder and also when I worked for the Advertiser, I got paid by the story. When I was working for them as a part-time staff writer, I was paid on a salary, but I had to produce 3 to 4 stories a week. As a freelancer, you don't have to produce that many stories because you're not under any obligation. but I try to do at least one story, submit one story a week.
Oh, you
Now,
definitely do, I think, more than that, because I feel like I see your name all the time in papers and
yeah,
things like that.
it's you know, sometimes it's more that. It all depends what they publish. Sometimes they'll hold a story because of space. In terms of word count, for example, I know that the Southwoods magazine out of Southwick, they do it by the word. Because many years ago I did some writing for them, and that's how they paid.
Yeah, a lot of magazines I find pay by the word count. You know, unless it's a I want to say like a contest, because then, you know, it's different. They have like prizes that they give out, and sometimes that's a lump sum. Have you done magazine writing?
No, I've always it's either been writing for an organization or a company, or it's been writing for a weekly paper where they pay per story, or on a salary if you're a part-time employee or an employee.
And so I find, like, people who write, you know, anyone who writes gets very personally involved in what they're writing. But you're not writing opinion columns. You're writing, like, factual reporting.
Yep.
So how is it that you can stick to just the facts, you know, and not put your own personal feelings or twists in there, because, you know, you kind of want to remain anonymous, you know, like the omniscient, you know, reporter, and not, you know, this is how I feel about this situation.
Well, when I started writing for the Agawam Advertiser after writing for an advocacy organization, in which, when I was writing for the advocacy organization, I advocated for certain positions that the organization took, and everything that was written was kind of geared towards that for the mission. Now, when I started writing when I write for the Reminder, and when I was writing for the Advertiser, I had to kind of back off of that and become more objective, and, you know, just kind of do it kind of straight, and not. And I don't put my opinions in the story, because that's not the right place for it. I'm not writing an opinion. So I try to be as objective as possible. And
how much research do you have to do?
It depends on the subject. It depends if I'm just covering something, a news story or an event or whatever. There's really not a lot to do. You just basically focus on the 5 W's: who, what, when, where. You get some quotes from somebody, and you write the story. Pretty straightforward. I do more research for feature writing, feature stories, and I do a lot of feature stories, because I like to do the feature stories more than the news stories.
Yeah.
They're more interesting. I can be a little bit more creative, but you still have to do the 5 W's, and then I do a little bit more research, especially if I'm going to be asking some questions. I want to know a little bit more about the topic and the person.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, like, I remember when, you know, we sat down and, you know, talked about, like, my writing and working with, you know, flowers and things. I'm thinking, you know, you must verify, like, oh, did she really own a flower shop? Or, you know, how these things, you know, come to be, because you don't want to be interviewing someone who's not real.
Well, the
topic is made up.
You know, you had a flower shop. You were there physically, so that kind of took that out of the equation. You know, at that point, the first one, when we were doing the story on April Rain, it was more about the book. It was more about what you did as an author, how you came up with the idea, what you did, and how you created the storyline and everything.
See, you've laid the groundwork for my show here too with that, because that's what I'm asking people when they come on, because I am always fascinated with what inspired someone to follow through and write what they wrote. You know, because it's one thing to, you know, I always say this to everyone in the audience, like, everybody has a story. Everybody's got some story that they can share, whether it's an experience or an imagination or facts about their life. But, you know, to actually sit down and write is a whole different, you know, thing. And then it's like you're taking the time to do that. So what was the calling to, you know, sit down and actually get those words on paper? And for you as a freelancer, I mean, it's a way to make a living, but it's something that you enjoy doing. So you were able to kind of bring both together.
Right.
Which is beautiful.
And I think you're right. Everybody has a story to tell. And one of my jobs when I'm doing a feature story is to try to get people to tell their story. And I think sometimes it's easier for them to talk to somebody or to answer a question by email than for them to actually sit down and write it. I mean, I had one person that I interviewed a couple of years ago whose sister died in her arms of cancer. And I really kind of talked with her and pulled a lot of information out of her that she wanted to share, but nobody had asked her. And she was just amazed at the end that she was able to tell that. But it was because I asked her some questions, so it gave her permission to talk about it that way.
Yeah. So when you're talking and interviewing someone like that, do you actually ask for a quote, or do you pick out something that they've said and used it as your quote?
I usually pick out something that they've said, because that's actually a quote, and they actually said it. So I pick that out and try to keep that as accurate as possible as to what they said. You know, sometimes I have to paraphrase, but I'll try to keep the quote as accurate as possible, unless there's an obvious error of grammar or something like that.
As a reporter, writer, when you're interviewing someone, do you prefer to take notes, or do you prefer to record the conversation so that you can listen to it later, or do you just sit and just absorb it all?
Actually do both. I write it down, and I also record, because that way it'll pick up things that I can't get down because people talk faster than I can write.
Yeah.
So that's why I do it both ways.
Yeah, you're almost like when you're writing a feature article on someone or some topic, it's like being like that ghostwriter of taking in the story and then putting it down on the paper. So,
yeah, in a way, yeah.
So people, can understand the story that needs to be shared, that the person needs to tell, or that the community needs to be aware about. What's your favorite kind of articles to write about?
I like to write about education. I like to write about interesting topics. Anything related with classic cars or automotive, I will definitely write. Matter of fact, I was always pitching stories to my editor about, hey, there's a good car show going on. You want me to go cover that, take some photos, and do some interviews? Because I've been to some of those, and you talk about people that want to talk about.
Oh yeah, they're so passionate about it.
They're so passionate. I could write one story on each one of these people.
Yeah.
But it varies. I mean, one of my favorite stories was one back in 2023. The Reminder was doing a special publication. It was called Impact, and for that I did the story on the 100th anniversary of Barnes Airport in Westfield. And I got to interview the airport manager. I got to find out why they were a success as a regional airport, what their future looks like. I got access to their archives of photos and information. I liked history, and so that was a fun story for me to do. And plus, I had a long lead time, and I had a larger word count to work with, so I wasn't as constrained as I usually was.
Well, talking about how you get passionate about writing about the cars and stuff, I can even see the stories behind those cars and the owners who had them, and there's such a history with all of it. I mean, I have a cottage on a lake, and I've always said I'd love to write stories about each individual cottage, because some of them have been there since the 1920s.
Yeah.
And we have a gentleman on the lake who's 104.
Oh, wow.
And I think he'll be 104 this year. So every summer we all gather in his yard, and he'll tell us stories of him being a kid, because his family literally, grew up there. And just hearing the stories about how, they would dig a hole in the ground and then they'd deliver ice by horses to put in. That was their refrigerator. And, it's like all these amazing things that you learn through the history. And then when you actually can see it, whether you're looking at that, restored antique car, or, that cool Corvette, or one of these cottages, or even just a person, just seeing the history behind it and seeing how it's evolved to get to this place right here.
Well, I think that's very interesting, is you learn how things came to be. Like even, let's say, Agawam, what's the story behind the street names?
Yeah.
How did they come up with that name for that street? Was it named after a person? Was it named after an event?
Yeah.
Or where it led to or led from?
Yeah, no, it's so true. And I mean, I always, people say, where are you from? And I'm like, oh, Agawam. But you say it's Mowaga backwards because the Mowaga Indian tribe, and all of a sudden you get all these like interesting tidbits. And, it's always cool to be like, and we have the first zip code in the country.
That's right.
And it's just like, understanding where you are from and, all of that. And how did I learn all that? I read it somewhere, probably in a newspaper.
Somebody had to write it. Somebody had to write it down and give you the information that you absorbed.
Yeah, and writing for papers exclusively is something that is historical documents.
Yes, and I try to do
for the public.
It's for the public, and a lot of times when I'm doing something, I try to put in information so that people understand if there's a reason to put it in, what the history is, or the reason for that being, what's the significance of it.
Yeah, because these are articles that, in 10, 15, 30, 100 years, someone can go into the archives and say, you know what, I want to look up that article on, that story he did on April Rain, whatever it is, because then people, can get put in that time again, and understand what happened. When I do some of my books, I definitely had to do some research and look up, articles and things like that. So, it was very important for me as a writer to be able to have the works of someone like you that I could trust and know that these are the facts.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that I always try to do in my articles, whether it's a feature or whether it's a news story, is I try to be as accurate as possible. And I really go through the process of where I proofread and I double check names of places and persons. I haven't been totally perfect. Sometimes I have misspelled names, and I feel very badly when I do that. But I do try to be as accurate as possible because it is going to be something that somebody may be referring to.
Yeah, and you're writing the article, but then do you edit it yourself, or does the newspaper edit when you're submitting it?
I edit.
How do you do the editing?
I edit my work.
What's your editing process like?
Well, basically, I do a draft, and then I revise that, and I may revise it a little bit more after that, and then I will go through it, I will proofread it, because I will print out a hard copy. I will proof it on the computer as much as possible. Then I find that I miss a lot on the computer.
Yeah, I need a hard copy.
I need a hard copy to go through, and I'll go through that. And once I have it to the point where I think it's good enough, I will send it to my editor. And generally, they may make a few minor changes in terms of maybe punctuation or something. But for the most part, I've been fortunate. They usually print the stories pretty much the way that I send them in.
Yeah, I think a lot of people need to be aware that if you're trying to write for a magazine or newspapers or anything, you have to be your own editor. Like a lot of people are like, oh, I'm going to write it and then I'll just give it to my editor and they'll clean it all up and make it look all good. It's like, it's not really that way.
No, one of the reasons that my former editor, who became the editor at the Reminder, wanted to hire me back as a freelancer was because he knew that the work that I submitted was good, and he would have to do just minor editing, which saves him time, and they value that because there's a lot of things that they have to do to get the newspaper produced, and the less time that they have to spend rewriting somebody's work.
No, it's, for me, like if I'm doing a novel, like the editing process for that is much different than if I'm just writing a short story or preparing for a show. With the novel, sometimes it has to sit on the back burner for a couple months before I can go back to read it to start editing. When you have a deadline that's, in 2 days, you have to kind of, move it all up, and you can't have that lingering time of saying, okay, I'm just going to put this down for a couple of days. You're like, nope, I'm getting right to it.
You don't have the luxury of perfecting it, so I do the best that I can. And one of the things that I have learned is that everybody needs an editor, because you can look at all of your work, you can think it's wonderful and everything, but you'll miss things because you correct it in your mind.
Right.
But somebody else looks at it and they'll say, "Oh, that's pretty obvious."
Yeah, no, 100%. I always say you got to have another set of eyes on it.
Absolutely.
Because there's always something you're going to miss, and no article I shouldn't say this, but no article is ever going to be written perfect.
No, and
so like you said, we do the best that we can
you do the best
with what
you can.
we have, and it's really fascinating that you made this whole career out of this, especially because you didn't really go to school to study like journalism, right? Or did you study?
Well,
you took classes and things.
once I decided I wanted to be a writer, this was like in my senior year. This is like May or something.
Senior
like that.
high school year.
Senior high school year. My actual career goal at that time was to be a golf course superintendent. And I had actually been accepted to the Stockbridge School at UMass. And we had in a class, we had a student teacher from UMass, and she said, "You've got a talent for writing." She said, "Don't waste it on being a golf course superintendent." So at that time, I applied to Holyoke Community College because that was the only thing that was available at that time. But I took a number of journalism, mass media courses there, which I enjoyed. And the professor was very good. And then once I got into corporate communications, they're as strict and as particular as newspaper editors are. They want it right.
Well, and same thing, especially with companies, like those are historical documents.
Right.
That's they need them to be accurate. So yeah, I mean it's wonderful. There's so much to learn from you, and like you said, writing is a gift, and when you have that gift, I mean, what's the greatest thing you can do with a gift is to share it with someone else. So, I thank you for coming on the show and sharing what you've learned and your knowledge and your wisdom and, just your experience that you've been doing as a writer for, many, many years. I'm going to say,
well, I hope it inspires
years.
somebody to become a writer or to,
Yeah. You've inspired me because I, love interviewing people. I think being an interviewer, like you said, you have to be curious. You have to be passionate.
That's one of the big
skills. You have to know how
to
ask the right questions. And sometimes most of the questions I ask are things I want to know. And I feel like if I want to know them, someone else wants to know them. But, sometimes you have to ask questions that, either you might already know the answers to, or, someone else wants those answers, and keeping it relevant to the topic. Like today we're talking about writing in our writing career. I mean, certainly I could say, are you married? Where do you live? How many kids do you have? Do you have a dog? All that personal stuff to get to know Mike Lydick. But talking about, Mike Lydick and his writing career and how you've gotten to be where you are and, just prolifically making your deadlines and constantly educating the community with your work is very valuable.
Well, that's what's relevant to what you're doing. Okay, the other stuff is nice. It's interesting.
Do you have pets?
Used to. Don't anymore.
Okay, well, they're with you in spirit.
Yes, they are.
They're with you in spirit, I can tell you that. Well, I've already told the audience where, they can find some reading, but where's some more articles coming out in the future that, they can see the actual reporting from Mike Lydick?
Well, you can pick up copies of the Agawam West Springfield Reminder. It's a community newspaper. It's free. Yeah. You don't have to pay for it. You can find it at a lot of convenience stores, town halls, in the town hall in Agawam or the public library. I also have stories sometimes in the Penny Saver or the Westfield News, which covers Southwick and Westfield. Stuff is also online at thereminder.com.
Mm-hmm. And then the Reminder takes it and sends it over to Mass Live. So Mass Live is putting some more of the articles on?
Yeah, more so if it's in the Westfield News.
Okay.
But if you look in the Sunday Republican, sometimes they will pick up on the inside page of the local section stories from Reminder publications.
Yeah, I see your name every time I open it.
And I see a number of my stories have been they take a capsule version of it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I hope you get residuals for them every time they send it out.
I wish. I wish.
Yeah, there's no writing to get rich.
No, once I submit it, it's free for them to use wherever they want to use it.
No. Well, I thank you so much for coming on the show today. This has been very informative. I could sit and talk to you for hours because I just love your energy, and I just know there's so much valuable information and personal information too that you're just a great person.
Thank you, Angela. It was my pleasure.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank you, my listening audience, for tuning in every week and signing on to YouTube and liking our channel there and just subscribing, because it's because of you that I can keep doing what I love, which is talking to writers about why they're writing. And for those of you who are looking to become a writer, this is the time time in the show where I'm going to give you a writing prompt. So when the show ends, the drill is to set your timer for 5 or 10 minutes, just however time you have. If you want to do 20 minutes, great. Set a timer on your phone or your microwave or whatever it is. Pick up a pen and actually, pen in hand, start writing. And today we've been talking to Mike Lydick about writing feature articles. And if you're looking to do something like that and submit, I want you to write a little feature article today, and I'm going to give you something kind of fun to do. I want you to pick someone in your life. Someone in your life. Could be a teacher, could be your spouse, could be your child, could be your neighbor. Pick one person, and I just want you to start writing some facts about them. So for a couple minutes, just jot down some facts and then start writing an article about them so that you're telling the world about this person, because that's what writing is actually sitting down, making your lists, and writing the words. So enjoy the assignment today, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Have a great day.